The man collapsed at her doorstep with 3 bullets in his chest and a price on his head, the same price her dead father once tried to collect. Ilara Vane stood frozen in her doorway, the howling wind throwing ice crystals against her face like tiny knives. The storm had been building for 3 days, the kind of brutal winter assault that killed even healthy wolves caught in its grip. She'd been checking the reinforced shutters when she'd heard it. A heavy thud against her door, followed by the wet rasp of labored breathing. Now she stared down at the man crumpled on her threshold, blood spreading beneath him in a dark pool that the snow was already trying to bury. Every instinct screamed at her to step back. Close the door. Let the storm finish what someone else had started. She'd survived 2 years alone in the burned ruins at the edge of what was once Silverbrook Pack territory by following one simple rule: stay invisible. Don't get involved. Don't leave tracks, don't make noise, don't exist in any way that might draw attention. The man at her feet groaned, and his hand twitched against the frozen ground. No wolf denies sanctuary to the starving. The old way rose up in her unbidden, her mother's voice speaking through the howling wind. A law older than any pack, older than the territories themselves. You fed the hungry. You sheltered the dying. You didn't ask questions until morning. Damn you, Ilara whispered. She wasn't sure if she was talking to her mother's ghost, to the stranger, or to herself. She grabbed him under the arms and dragged. He was heavier than he looked. Solid muscle beneath the blood-soaked clothes, tall enough that his boots left furrows in the snow as she hauled him across her threshold. By the time she got him inside and kicked the door shut against the screaming wind, her arms were shaking and her breath came in sharp gasps. The cabin wasn't much. 4 walls, a fireplace, a bed she'd salvaged from the wreckage of her old life. But it was warm, and it was hidden, and it had kept her alive when nothing else could. She rolled the stranger onto his back and got her first real look at him. Dark hair, matted with blood and ice. Strong features, the kind of face that would turn heads in any pack gathering. Mid-30s, maybe. Hard to tell with wolves. A body built for violence, scarred in ways that spoke of battles survived. 3 bullet wounds in his chest, still sluggishly bleeding. You should be dead, she murmured. Regular wolves didn't survive 3 shots to the chest. Not even alphas. The bullets would have to come out, the wounds would need cleaning, and even then, infection would likely take him before morning. But she'd made her choice when she dragged him inside. The old ways demanded she see it through. Ilara built up the fire until the cabin blazed with heat, then gathered her meager supplies. A knife, sterilized in the flames. Clean rags torn from a shirt she couldn't afford to lose. The last of the whiskey she'd been saving for emergencies. She cut away his ruined shirt and went to work. The first bullet came out easily, lodged shallow in the muscle below his collarbone. The second had gone deeper, scraping against a rib before stopping just short of his lung. By the time she dug out the third, buried near his heart, close enough to kill any normal wolf. Her hands were steady with a calm she didn't feel. The stranger never woke. His breathing stayed shallow but even, his body burning with fever as it fought to heal itself. And that was the first strange thing. Ilara watched, fascinated despite herself, as the wounds began to close. Not the slow knitting she'd seen in injured packmates during her old life. This was something else. Something faster, more complete, as if his body refused to accept damage the way normal flesh did. Within an hour, the bullet wounds had become angry red marks. Within 2, they'd faded to pink scars. By morning, she had to look closely to see them at all. "What are you?" she whispered. The stranger slept on, oblivious to her fear. She gave him the last of her stores. Broth first, dripped between his lips while he drifted in and out of consciousness. Then solid food when he could swallow. Her winter supplies, carefully rationed to last until spring, gone in 3 days of keeping a stranger alive. She told herself she could hunt when the storm broke. Told herself she was following the old ways, nothing more. But something else was happening. Something she couldn't explain. From the moment she'd dragged him inside, her wolf had been restless. The omega instincts she'd spent 2 years suppressing were surging to the surface, responding to his presence with a recognition that made no sense. She'd never seen this man before. He was a stranger, a rogue, a nobody who'd stumbled into her territory half dead and stayed that way for days. Yet her wolf knew him. Responded to him. Yearned toward him with an intensity that felt like memory. Stop it, she told herself firmly. He's nothing. No one. As soon as he's well enough to walk, he's gone. The rejection still lived in her bones, 2 years old and sharp as the day it happened. Her fated mate had looked at her across the flames of her burning pack house and said the words that severed their bond forever. She'd felt it snap like a breaking bone, had carried the phantom ache of it ever since. She wasn't interested in whatever her wolf thought it recognized in this stranger. She wasn't interested in anything except surviving another winter, another year, another decade of invisibility. But her wolf didn't listen to reason. He woke on the 4th day. Elara was by the fire, mending a tear in her only coat, when she heard the rhythm of his breathing change. She looked up to find pale gray eyes watching her, confused and wary. "Where am I?" His voice came out rough, scraped raw by days of disuse. "Safe." She set aside her mending but didn't move closer. "For now." "Who are you?" "Elara." "You're in my cabin." She kept her tone flat, her expression neutral. "You showed up half dead in a storm 4 days ago. I dug 3 bullets out of your chest. You're welcome." He tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the thin pillow. His hand went to his chest, fingers tracing the faded scars she knew he'd find there. 3 bullets, he repeated slowly. "Someone wanted you very dead." She watched his face, looking for any flicker of recognition, any hint of memory. "Care to tell me why?" His brow furrowed. His eyes went distant, searching inward for something that clearly wasn't there. When he looked at her again, the confusion had deepened into something that might have been fear. "I don't know," he said. "I don't. I can't remember. Can't remember why someone shot you. Can't remember anything." The words came slowly, like he was testing them for truth. "My name. Where I came from. What I was doing before." He trailed off, and Elara felt the first cold tendril of unease wrap around her spine. "Nothing at all?" "Nothing." His hand went to his chest again, pressing against the scars. "Just shadows. Fragments. Nothing that makes sense." She should have thrown him out then. Should have pointed toward the door and told him to take his amnesia and his impossibly fast healing and his 3-bullet wounds somewhere else. Any other pack's problem. Any other wolf's responsibility. But the storm still raged outside, and the old ways still held her in their grip, and her wolf was still straining toward him with that terrible, inexplicable recognition. So she let him stay. He was weak at first, sleeping more than he was awake, his body still burning through reserves to complete its impossible healing. She fed him what she could spare, which wasn't much. Taught him the layout of her small cabin, the location of the woodpile, the path to the frozen stream where she collected water. He asked about her life, and she gave him the bare minimum. Alone. 2 years. Survivor. He didn't ask about her pack, and she didn't offer. His wolf stayed silent. She could feel it there, buried deep beneath his human consciousness, but it never rose to the surface. Never responded when she let her own wolf brush against it in careful, testing touches. It was like trying to wake someone from a coma. The body was present, but something essential was missing. "It's strange," he told her one night, sitting by the fire while she sorted through herbs she dried the previous summer. "I know I should be able to feel something. But there's just this emptiness where something used to be." "Your wolf?" "I think so." He stared into the flames. "I know I'm a wolf. I can feel that much. But reaching for the shift is like reaching for a memory I can't quite grasp." Elara said nothing. She'd seen wolves lose their connection to their animal halves before, usually through trauma, sometimes through torture. The recovery was slow when it happened at all. Whatever had been done to this stranger, it had broken something fundamental. The nightmares started on the 6th night. She woke to the sound of him thrashing, crying out in a voice raw with terror. Words spilled from him, fractured and desperate, names she didn't recognize and phrases that made no sense. But then, Blackwood, the traitor. Elara went very still. The Silverbrook wolves screaming. Her heart stopped. Then started again, pounding against her ribs with a force that made her dizzy. Blood on the snow. Blood everywhere. They're all dead. They're all. He woke with a gasp, shooting upright, his gray eyes wild and unfocused. For a long moment he just sat there, chest heaving, sweat plastering dark hair to his forehead. Then his gaze found her, and something in his expression shifted. Settled. Bad dream, she managed. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I don't know. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. I can never hold on to them. Just impressions. Fear. Guilt. A pause. Screaming. Silverbrook wolves screaming. Her pack. Her family. Her entire world, burned to nothing while her fated mate watched and did nothing. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, she changed his bandages. He didn't need them anymore, the wounds were fully healed, leaving behind only faint silver scars, but the routine gave her an excuse to examine him. To look for any sign of who he'd been before the storm brought him to her door. She found it beneath his left collarbone. A brand. Old enough that the scar had faded to pale pink, but still clearly visible against his skin. A distinctive shape, unmistakable to anyone who'd grown up in the territories. A black crown. 2 wolves rampant. The mark of the Fenrir bloodline. The sigil of the Alpha King. Elara's hands went very still against his skin. The world narrowed to that single mark, that impossible symbol burned into the flesh of the stranger she'd nursed back to health. The Alpha King. The wolf who ruled all the territories. The wolf who'd ordered the purge of rogue packs 3 years ago, who'd signed the death warrants and dispatched the enforcers and watched from his throne while entire bloodlines were extinguished. The wolf who'd given the order that burned her world to ash. Elara? His voice seemed to come from very far away. Is something wrong? She pulled her hands back. Forced her expression into something neutral. Made herself meet those pale gray eyes that she now recognized from wanted posters and bounty notices and the nightmares that had haunted her for 2 years. Nothing, she said. Everything's healing fine. But her mind was racing, her heart was pounding, and her wolf, her traitorous, impossible wolf, was still straining toward him with all the desperate recognition of a bond she'd never asked for and couldn't begin to understand. The Alpha King was lying in her bed. The monster who'd murdered her pack was sleeping under her roof. And somewhere in the ruins of her burned-out heart, something that felt terrifyingly like fate was beginning to stir. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. He called himself Kale. The name had come to him in fragments, like everything else. A whisper in the dark spaces of his broken memory, familiar enough to feel true. Elara didn't question it. She had bigger problems than what to call the monster sleeping under her roof. 3 days had passed since she'd found the brand. 3 days of smiling when she wanted to scream, of serving him food with hands that wanted to hold a knife, of lying beside the fire at night while he slept in her bed and pretending she wasn't counting his breaths and imagining each one stopping. She could kill him. She should kill him. Every law of blood and vengeance demanded it. But her wolf wouldn't let her. The bond she hadn't known existed thrummed between them like a second heartbeat, growing stronger with each passing hour. She felt him even when he was across the cabin, a warm presence at the edge of her consciousness that her omega instincts wrapped around like a drowning woman clutching driftwood. Her wolf had chosen him. Claimed him. Decided that this male, this murderer, was theirs. Elara had never hated herself more. Kale woke gentler than any alpha should be. She watched him those first few days, waiting for the cruelty to surface. The arrogance. The cold command that she'd heard described in whispered stories about the Alpha King. The wolf who ruled the territories with an iron fist, who crushed rebellions before they could spark, who had sent his enforcers to burn and slaughter and leave nothing but ash in their wake. Instead, she found a man who winced when he accidentally stepped on her foot. Who apologized for taking too much space in her small cabin. Who looked at her like she was something precious and confusing, a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Let me help," he said on the fourth morning, watching her struggle to split frozen logs with an axe that had seen better days. "Please." She wanted to refuse. Wanted to tell him that she didn't need anything from him, that his help was poison, that every kindness he offered was just another weight on the scales that already tipped so heavily toward revenge. But her arms ached and her shoulders burned and the woodpile was running dangerously low. "Fine," she said, and handed him the axe. He split the wood like he'd been born to it. Smooth, powerful strokes that sent the frozen logs flying apart with barely any effort. She watched the muscles move beneath his borrowed shirt, her father's old clothes, found in the wreckage, one more cruel irony, and felt her wolf purr with satisfaction. "Strong," her wolf whispered. "Good provider." "Ours." "Murderer," Elara reminded her. "Monster. The reason everyone we loved is dead." But her wolf didn't seem to care. He hunted for her. She woke one morning to find him gone, panic flashing through her before she spotted the note scratched into the frost on her window. "Back soon. Getting breakfast." He returned an hour later with 2 rabbits and a pheasant, cleaned and ready for cooking. Laid them at her feet like offerings, then stood there with snow in his dark hair and hope in his gray eyes, waiting for her approval. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "You've been feeding me for over a week. It's the least I can do." He shifted his weight, suddenly uncertain. "I know I'm a burden. I know you didn't ask for any of this. But I want to help. However I can." She should have thrown the rabbits in his face. Should have told him that no amount of fresh meat could pay for what he'd taken from her. Instead, she heard herself say, "Thank you." And meant it. That night, she cried into her pillow until her throat was raw, hating him, hating herself, hating the bond that made her crave his presence even as she plotted his death. He heard her sing. She hadn't meant for anyone to hear. The morning songs were private, sacred, something she only allowed herself in the deepest hours of the night when the grief became too heavy to carry alone. Old words in the ancient tongue, passed down from her mother and her mother's mother, songs meant to guide lost souls to their rest. She sang for her pack. For her mother. For the girl she'd been before the fire took everything. But sound carried in the small cabin, and Kale's hearing was sharper than she'd realized. She found him sitting by the banked fire when she emerged from her room, his face wet with tears he didn't seem aware of shedding. "That song," he said, his voice rough. "I know that song." Elara's heart stuttered. "How?" "I don't know." He pressed a hand to his chest, to the place where the brand lay hidden beneath his shirt. "But it made me feel grief. Loss. Like I was mourning something I can't remember losing." "Good," she thought viciously. "Mourn. Suffer. Feel even a fraction of what you've made others feel." But her wolf keened with sympathy, and her feet carried her closer before she could stop them, and she found herself sitting beside him in the firelight, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. "It's a mourning song," she heard herself say. "For the dead. For those who died with things left unsaid. Will you teach it to me?" She should have said no. Should have guarded this last piece of her heritage, kept it safe from the wolf who had tried to destroy her people. "Maybe," she said instead. "Someday." And the look he gave her, grateful, wondering, reverent, made her want to scream and cry and kiss him all at once. The memories came back like shattered glass, each piece cutting deeper than the last. It started with nightmares. Fragmented images that left him gasping, reaching for details that dissolved like smoke when he tried to grasp them. But gradually, the fragments began to connect. Names attached themselves to faces. Places materialized from the fog. The shape of his old life emerged from the shadows, piece by agonizing piece. Elara watched it happen. Watched the confusion in his eyes slowly give way to recognition, then horror. Watched him wake each morning with more weight on his shoulders, more ghosts haunting his gaze. She waited. Patient as a hunter, quiet as the grave. Letting him assemble the picture at his own pace while she planned what she would do when he finally remembered enough. The day came sooner than she expected. She was outside, checking the snares she'd set along the tree line, when she heard him scream. Not a nightmare scream, this was different. Raw. Terrible. The sound of a man whose world was collapsing around him. She ran. She found him on his knees in the middle of the cabin, hands pressed to his head, body shaking with sobs that seemed to tear themselves from somewhere deep in his chest. Cale? She stopped in the doorway, uncertain. What? I remember. The words came out broken, jagged. God help me, I remember everything. He told her on the floor of her cabin, still shaking, unable to meet her eyes. He told her about the reports that had crossed his desk 3 years ago. Rumors of an alpha in the Northern Territories running a trafficking ring, selling Omega women to enemy packs for breeding stock. The investigation that had confirmed the worst. The arrest order he had signed, meant to bring the alpha to justice and free his victims. He told her about his High General, Marcus Blackwood. The wolf he'd trusted above all others, the commander he'd sent to execute the arrest. The friend who had smiled and bowed and promised to handle everything with appropriate care. He told her about the massacre. I didn't order a slaughter, Cale said, his voice hollow. I ordered an arrest. A trial. Justice through proper channels. But Blackwood. He swallowed hard. Blackwood wanted no survivors. No witnesses. No one left alive who could contradict whatever story he chose to tell. Elara's blood had turned to ice. She stood frozen by the door, unable to move, unable to speak, barely able to breathe. The trafficking ring wasn't just Alpha Vane, Cale continued. Blackwood was his partner. Had been for years. They split the profits, covered each other's tracks. When I started investigating, Blackwood knew it was only a matter of time before I discovered the truth. So he arranged for the Silverbrook pack to be eliminated, and for me to take the blame. No. The word tore itself from Elara's throat. No, you're lying. My father wasn't, he wouldn't. I'm sorry. Cale finally looked at her, and the anguish in his eyes was terrible to behold. I'm so sorry. I know how hard this is to hear. But your father sold Omega women to the Shadowfang pack for breeding. Dozens of them over the years. The records were in his own hand. No. She was shaking now, trembling with a rage that had nowhere to go. You're just trying to justify what you did. Trying to make yourself feel better about murdering innocent people. I didn't murder anyone. He rose slowly, carefully, making no move to approach her. But I might as well have. I trusted Blackwood. I gave him the authority to act in my name. Every death that night is on my hands, whether I ordered it or not. Elara's mind was reeling. Spinning through memories she'd buried deep, moments she'd tried to forget. Her mother, dying in childbirth. That was the story her father had told. But Elara had been 8 years old enough to remember that her mother had never been pregnant. Old enough to remember the bruises on her mother's arms, the fear in her eyes, the whispered conversations that stopped whenever Elara walked into the room. Her Omega aunties. The women who had been kind to her, who had taught her the morning songs and the old ways. One by one, they had vanished. Sent to visit relatives in other packs, her father said. Starting new lives elsewhere. She had believed him. Had wanted to believe him. Because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. And then there was the way he had looked at her. His only daughter, his heir, his supposed pride and joy. But she had never seen pride in his eyes when he looked at her. Only disappointment. Only disgust. Only a cold calculation that made her skin crawl even as a child. Worthless merchandise damaged before sale. She had heard him say it once, talking to one of his men when he thought she wasn't listening. At the time, she hadn't understood. Had convinced herself she'd misheard, misunderstood, made it mean something it didn't. Now, standing in her small cabin with the Alpha King's words echoing in her ears, understanding crashed over her like a wave of black water. Her father hadn't loved her. Had never loved her. She was inventory to him, a product to be sold when the price was right. The only reason she'd survived to adulthood was that he hadn't found a buyer willing to pay enough. Elara. Cale's voice was soft, careful. I know this is. Don't. She held up a hand, and he stopped. Just, don't. Not yet. She needed time. Needed space. Needed to sit with this new truth and figure out how to carry it alongside all the other grief she'd been hauling for 2 years. But time was something they didn't have. The hunters came at dusk. Elara heard them first, the snap of a twig, the crunch of snow under boots trying to move quietly. Her wolf went rigid, ears pricked, every sense straining toward the threat. Someone's coming, she breathed. Cale was at her side in an instant, his body tense, his eyes scanning the tree line beyond the cabin's single window. The setting sun threw long shadows across the snow, turning the forest into a maze of light and darkness. How many? She closed her eyes, letting her wolf senses expand. Counting heartbeats, distinguishing scents, mapping the positions of bodies moving through the trees. 6. Maybe 7. Her eyes snapped open. They're wearing, she stopped. Swallowed. They're wearing Blackwood's colors. Cale's expression went cold. Hard. For the first time since she dragged him out of the storm, she saw the Alpha King looking out through his eyes. The wolf who had ruled the territories. The wolf who had commanded armies and crushed rebellions and made grown men tremble with a single glance. Get behind me, he said. I can fight. They're not here for you. They're here for me. He moved toward the door, and she saw his hands beginning to shake. Not with fear, she realized. With something else. Something that was trying to break free from deep inside him. Stay back, little Omega. This is going to get ugly. The door exploded inward. The first hunter died before he'd made it 2 steps into the cabin. Elara didn't see Cale move. One moment he was standing in front of her, human and vulnerable. The next, a blur of white fur slammed into the hunter's chest, jaws closing around his throat with a sound like tearing cloth. She'd thought she understood what alpha meant. Thought she'd seen powerful wolves before, watched them shift and fight and dominate their enemies. She had never seen anything like this. Cale's wolf was enormous. Pure white from muzzle to tail, larger than any wolf she'd ever encountered. He moved like liquid death, flowing from one target to the next with a grace that belonged to nightmares. The hunters had come prepared for a fight. They shifted even as they poured through the ruined door, dark wolves bristling with rage and trained for violence. They didn't stand a chance. Cale tore through them like they were made of paper. 3 died in the cabin, their blood painting the wall she'd worked so hard to make into a home. 2 more fell in the snow outside, trying to flee, learning too late that nothing could outrun the white wolf. The 6th made it almost to the tree line before Cale caught him, dragging him down in a spray of crimson that stained the pristine snow. The 7th, there had been 7, Elara's count had been right, tried to circle around. Tried to get to her while Cale was occupied with the others. He made it through the ruined door. Made it 3 steps toward where she stood frozen, her back against the wall, her wolf howling for her to fight, to run, to do something. Then white fur filled her vision, and the hunter's scream cut off with a wet gurgle, and it was over. Silence. The cabin was destroyed. Blood everywhere, bodies crumpled in positions that would haunt her dreams, the smell of death thick enough to choke on. And in the middle of it all, the white wolf stood motionless, crimson dripping from his muzzle onto the floor. Slowly, he turned to face her. She should have been afraid. Should have been terrified of this creature who had just killed 7 trained hunters in less than a minute, whose white fur was now streaked with so much blood that he looked like something from a fever dream. But her wolf recognized him. Her wolf had always recognized him. And now, with his alpha finally unleashed, with the bond between them blazing like a live wire, she understood why. Mate. The word resonated through her, through the connection she'd been trying to deny since the moment she dragged him out of the snow. Not just a bond of proximity or circumstance. A true mate bond. The kind that happened once in a lifetime, if you were lucky. The kind that was supposed to be sacred, unbreakable, forever. The white wolf took a step toward her. Then another. Blood dripped from his fur, pooling on the floor, leaving crimson paw prints in his wake. And then his voice filled her mind, sliding through the bond like honey and smoke, and she realized that he'd known. The whole time. Some part of him had known. Run with me, little Omega. She couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Could only stare into those pale gray eyes, now burning with a possessive fire that made her wolf whimper with need. They'll send more. Blackwood won't stop until I'm dead, and now that he knows you exist, he'll use you to draw me out. I'm not yours, she whispered. The words felt like lies even as she spoke them. I didn't choose this. I didn't choose you. I know. Grief flickered through the bond, followed by something like acceptance. But choice won't matter to the wolves coming for us. They'll take you. Hurt you. Use you as bait until I come running. And then. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't have to. She'd seen what Blackwood's hunters had tried to do to her. She could imagine what they'd do if they had time. Run with me, Cale said again. Please. I can protect you. I will protect you. But only if you let me. The smart thing would be to refuse. To take her chances alone, disappear into the wilderness, start over somewhere far from the territories and the Alpha King and the war that was about to consume everything. But her wolf was already leaning toward him. Already yearning. And somewhere in the wreckage of her heart, beneath all the grief and rage and betrayal, a tiny spark of something that might have been hope was beginning to burn. If I run with you, she said slowly, I want answers. All of them. Everything about my pack, my father, what really happened that night. You'll have them. I swear it. And if I decide I still want to kill you when I know the truth? Something that might have been a smile flickered through the bond. Then I'll hand you the blade myself. Outside, distant but growing closer, the sound of howling split the night. More hunters. More death. More of Blackwood's wolves, drawn by the silence of their fallen comrades. Elara looked at the ruins of her cabin. Her sanctuary. The last piece of her old life, now painted with blood and memories and choices she couldn't take back. Then she looked at the white wolf waiting for her answer. Fine, she said. But I'm not running behind you. I run beside you, or not at all. The wolf dipped his massive head in acknowledgement. Then he turned toward the door, toward the darkness beyond, toward the howling that was getting closer with every passing second. Then run, little Omega. Run with me. And may the gods help anyone who tries to stop us. She shifted. Her wolf surged forward eagerly, finally free after 2 years of hiding, ready to run and fight and claim what was hers. Together, they plunged into the night. Chapter 3. She was not running with him. Elara repeated this to herself as they plunged deeper into the ashwood, her wolf's paws striking the frozen ground in perfect rhythm with the massive white beast beside her. She was running near him. Temporarily. Until she figured out her next move. There was a difference. The ashwood rose around them like a cathedral of shadows, ancient trees so tall their branches blocked out the stars. This was neutral territory, the great unclaimed wilderness between the northern packs and the southern territories. No alpha's law reached here. No king's authority held sway. It was a place for the lost, the exiled, the wolves who had slipped through the cracks of civilized pack society. It was also, Elara had heard, a place where wolves went to disappear. They ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled, until the howling of Blackwood's hunters faded to distant echoes and then to nothing at all. Only then did Kale slow, leading her toward a rocky outcropping that offered shelter from the bitter wind. She shifted back to human form, shivering as the cold hit her bare skin. Her clothes were back at the cabin, the ruined cabin, the blood-soaked cabin, the place that had been her sanctuary until an hour ago. Kale shifted beside her, and she forced herself not to look. Not to notice the broad shoulders and lean muscle and the way the moonlight turned his pale skin to silver. He was still a murderer. Still the wolf who had given the order that set everything in motion, even if the massacre itself had been Blackwood's doing. She didn't trust him. She didn't want him. Her wolf's disagreement was loud enough to make her teeth ache. "There's a cave," Kale said, his voice rough from the shift. 100 yards up the slope. "We can rest there until dawn." "Fine." She followed him up the rocky hillside, arms wrapped around herself for warmth, refusing his offered hand when the climb grew steep. The cave was small but dry, sheltered enough from the wind that her shivering began to ease. Kale gathered wood without being asked. Built a fire with the efficient movements of someone who had survived in the wild before. Within minutes, flames crackled against the stone walls, throwing dancing shadows across his face. "You should sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch. I'm not tired." A lie. She was exhausted down to her bones, wrung out by grief and shock and the terrible revelations of the past hours. But sleep meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant trust, and trust was something she had no intention of offering. Kale nodded, accepting her refusal without argument. He settled against the cave wall, positioning himself between her and the entrance, and fixed his gaze on the darkness beyond. Guarding her. Protecting her. Even though she'd given him nothing but suspicion and hostility since the moment she'd found the brand on his chest. Her wolf purred with approval. Elara told her wolf to shut up. 3 days in the ashwood, and the bond between them had grown into something she couldn't ignore. It wasn't anything he did. That was the infuriating part. Kale never commanded her. Never pulled rank or reminded her that he was, had been, the Alpha King. When they disagreed about which direction to travel, he listened to her reasoning and deferred to her knowledge of the northern territories. When she snarled at him over some small irritation, the exhaustion and grief making her sharp and mean, he simply waited until her temper passed. And when she pushed too hard, testing his limits, trying to find the arrogant alpha she knew must be hiding beneath the surface, he bared his throat. The first time it happened, she thought she'd imagined it. They were arguing about whether to cross a frozen stream or find a safer path around it, and she'd gotten in his face, her wolf rising to the surface, ready for a fight she desperately needed. Kale had gone still. Then, slowly, deliberately, he'd tilted his head back, exposing the vulnerable column of his throat to her teeth. Submission. Complete and unconditional. The gesture of a wolf acknowledging another's authority. An alpha king, submitting to an omega. "What are you doing?" she demanded, too shocked for anger. "Showing you that I'm not a threat." His eyes had stayed on hers, calm and steady. "You've lost everything because of wolves who use their power to control and destroy. I won't be another one. Not to you." She'd wanted to argue. Wanted to point out that pretty gestures meant nothing, that submission could be faked, that she'd seen alphas play humble before they struck. But her wolf had recognized the truth in his submission. Had felt it through the bond, the genuine desire to make her feel safe, the willingness to set aside his pride if it meant earning even a fraction of her trust. She'd turned away without responding, and they'd crossed the frozen stream in silence. But something had shifted between them after that. Some wall she'd been building had developed cracks she couldn't quite repair. They found the rogues on the fourth day. Or rather, the rogues found them. Elara caught the scent first, multiple wolves surrounding them, moving into position with practiced coordination. She grabbed Kale's arm in warning, felt him go tense beside her, his wolf surging toward the surface. "Easy," she murmured. "Let me handle this." Elara. Rogues have their own rules. An alpha king walking into their territory is a threat. An omega with a story might get us through alive. She didn't wait for his agreement. Stepped forward, hands raised, calling out in the dialect her mother had taught her. The old words that marked her as someone who understood the way of wolves who lived outside pack law. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, from the shadows between the trees, a figure emerged. She was tall and lean, with close-cropped dark hair and a face that might have been beautiful before someone had carved a ragged scar from her left temple to the corner of her mouth. She moved with the coiled grace of a predator, and her eyes, pale amber, almost gold, held the flat, assessing stare of a wolf who had learned to kill without hesitation. "Well," the scarred woman said, her voice like gravel over silk. "An omega who speaks the old tongue. That's something you don't see every day." "I'm looking for passage through neutral territory," Elara said. "Nothing more." "And your companion?" The amber eyes slid to Kale, and Elara saw recognition flicker in their depths. "Does he also seek simple passage? Or is there something else the Alpha King wants from the Ashwood?" Kale went rigid beside her. Elara's heart dropped into her stomach. "You know who he is." "I know what he is." The scarred woman smiled, and there was no warmth in it. Hard to forget the face of the wolf who was supposed to save us, and didn't. The rogues' camp was hidden in a network of caves that wound through the hillside like a rabbit warren. Dozens of wolves moved through the tunnels, their eyes tracking Elara and Kale with open suspicion. The scarred woman, Sorka, she'd called herself, led them to a larger cavern that served as a meeting hall. A fire burned in a stone pit at its center, surrounded by wolves in human form, all of them bearing the marks of hard survival. "Sit," Sorka said, gesturing to a space near the fire. "We have things to discuss." Elara sat. Kale remained standing, his posture tense, his eyes never leaving Sorka's face. "You recognized me," he said. "How?" "I was there the night your general came to Silverbrook." Sorka settled across the fire from them, the flames casting strange shadows over her scarred features. "I was one of the Omegas being held in the cellar, waiting for transport to my new owner." The words hit Elara like a physical blow. She stared at Sorka, seeing her for the first time. Not just a rogue leader, but a survivor. A woman who had lived through the nightmare that had consumed Elara's pack. "You were one of the..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "One of the merchandise?" Sorka's smile turned bitter. "Yes. I'd been in that cellar for 3 months, waiting for Alpha Vane to find a buyer willing to pay his price. I was considered difficult, you see. Too much fight in me. It drove down my value." "How did you escape?" "When the killing started, the guards ran. Left us locked in. I managed to break the door, shattered my shoulder doing it, but I got it open. Most of the others were too weak to run. I carried out as many as I could before the fire reached the cellar." She paused. 6 of us survived. 3 died in the following weeks. The other 2 are somewhere in these caves, trying to rebuild lives that were stolen from them." Elara's hands had started to shake. She pressed them against her thighs, trying to hide the trembling, but Sorka's amber eyes missed nothing. "You didn't know," the rogue leader said. "It wasn't a question. You really didn't know what your father was." "He was my father." The words came out broken, jagged. "He was cruel, yes. Cold. But I thought. I never imagined. Of course you didn't. You were his daughter. His blood. He would have kept the truth from you as long as possible. Sorka rose, moving to a chest in the corner of the cavern. But I think it's time you knew everything. She returned with a leather satchel, worn and water-stained, and laid it in Alara's lap. I took this from your father's study while everyone was dying. I thought it might be useful someday. Sorka's voice hardened. I was right. The ledger was damning. Page after page of entries in her father's precise handwriting. Names, dates, prices. Physical descriptions. Height, weight, coloring, whether the omega in question was intact. Buyer information, delivery schedules, payment confirmations. Alara read through it with numb fingers, watching her illusions crumble one by one. The omega aunties who had taught her the morning songs, all of them were listed. Her mother's sister. Her childhood nurse. The kind woman who had braided flowers into her hair at summer festivals. Sold. All of them. Sold to packs she'd never heard of, to alphas whose names made Sorka's scarred face go pale. The Shadowfang pack was his biggest customer, Sorka said quietly. They breed omegas like livestock. Keep them pregnant until their bodies give out, then discard them. Most don't survive more than a few years. Alara thought she might be sick. There's one more thing you need to see. Sorka leaned forward, turning the ledger's pages until she reached an entry near the end. The last one. Dated the night of the massacre. Alara looked down at her father's handwriting, at the entry that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Alara Vane. Age 19. Untouched. Reserved for private auction. Buyer, General Marcus Blackwood. Price pending completion of services rendered. The words swam before her eyes. She read them again. And again. Trying to make them mean something different than what they clearly, horribly said. He was saving you, Sorka said, her voice gentle now, almost kind. Not out of love. Not out of mercy. He was saving you because Blackwood wanted you specifically, and your father was waiting for the payment. The massacre was that payment. Blackwood got to eliminate his partner and cover his tracks, and in exchange, he would get you. No. The word came out as a whisper. No, that's not, he was my father. Whatever else he was, he wouldn't. He would. Kale's voice cut through her denial, rough with anger that she somehow knew wasn't directed at her. Men like your father see omegas as property. Resources to be exploited. It doesn't matter if you're blood. It only matters what you're worth. You don't know that. You don't know him. You don't. But she couldn't finish. Couldn't force the defense past her lips, because somewhere deep inside, in the part of her that had always wondered why her father looked at her with such cold calculation, she knew the truth. He had been saving her. Like meat in a cellar, waiting for the right buyer. She broke. The grief came like a flood, overwhelming her defenses, drowning her in waves of anguish she couldn't control. Everything she had mourned, her pack, her father, her stolen life, had been a beautiful lie. A painted facade hiding a horror beyond imagining. She had wept for a man who had planned to sell her to a monster. She had mourned a family that had been built on the suffering of countless Omega women. She had spent 2 years in hiding, grieving a world that had never really existed at all. The sobs tore through her, ugly and raw, shaking her body with a force that left her gasping. She was vaguely aware of Sorka moving away, of the other rogues withdrawing to give her privacy, but none of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the devastating weight of the truth and the ruins of everything she believed. Then arms wrapped around her, and she was pulled against a broad chest, and a voice was murmuring words she couldn't quite hear but could somehow feel, comfort flowing through the bond, steady and warm and asking nothing in return. Kale held her while she shattered. He didn't try to fix it. Didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. Didn't tell her it would be okay when they both knew it wouldn't. He simply held on, his presence an anchor in the storm, his heartbeat a steady rhythm against her ear. She should have pushed him away. Should have reminded herself that he was part of this nightmare, that his orders had set everything in motion, that she had every reason to hate him. But she was so tired. So empty. So utterly alone in a world that had just revealed itself to be far darker than she'd ever imagined. So she let him hold her. Let herself lean into his warmth. Let the bond between them pulse with a comfort she didn't deserve and couldn't refuse. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "I'm not going anywhere. I've got you." And even though she knew better than to believe him, some part of her did. Hours later, when the tears had finally stopped and the hollow ache had settled into something almost bearable, Sorka returned. Elara was still sitting beside Kale, their shoulders touching, the fire burning low between them and the watching rogues. She felt scraped raw, exposed, but also somehow lighter. Like the breaking had released a poison she'd been carrying without knowing. "There's more," Sorka said, settling across from them. "I wasn't sure whether to tell you tonight, but..." She glanced at Kale, something complicated passing across her scarred features. "You need to know what you're up against. Tell me." Elara's voice came out hoarse but steady. "Whatever it is, I need to know." Sorka nodded. "Word has reached us from the territories. Marcus Blackwood has declared himself regent. He's claiming that the Alpha King," she nodded toward Kale, "died in a rogue attack 3 weeks ago. The body was never recovered, but Blackwood has enough support on the council to make his claim stick." Kale's jaw tightened. "He's consolidating power. Making himself impossible to remove before anyone can challenge his story. It's worse than that." Sorka leaned forward, her amber eyes intent on Elara's face. "He's hunting for any surviving Silverbrook wolves. Not to silence them, or not just to silence them. He's looking for one specific Omega. A woman with a gift so rare it's been thought extinct for generations." Elara frowned. "What kind of gift?" "The Luna healers were wiped out 200 years ago," Sorka said. "Slaughtered during the Great Pack Wars because their power was considered too dangerous to let any Alpha control. The gift was supposed to have died with them." She paused. "But according to Blackwood's hunters, the ones we've intercepted, the ones we've questioned, he believes a Luna healer survived. That the bloodline continued in secret, passing through certain Omega families." She trailed off, her eyes fixed on Elara with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Families like mine," Elara said slowly. "Your mother's line. The same line that produced your grandmother, who was rumored to have healing abilities beyond any normal wolf. The same line that Blackwood has been obsessed with for years, according to the records your father kept." "I'm not a healer." Elara shook her head. "I've never healed anyone. I don't have any special abilities." "The gift often lies dormant," Sorka said. "Sometimes for an entire lifetime. But strong emotion, extreme stress, the presence of a mate bond." Her gaze flickered to Kale and back. "These things can trigger an awakening." "You're wrong. I would know if I had some kind of power. I would have felt it." But even as she spoke the words, something stirred deep inside her. A warmth in her chest, a tingling in her fingertips, a strange sense of something sleeping just beneath the surface of her consciousness. Something that had been growing stronger ever since she dragged a half-dead stranger out of a winter storm. The attack came without warning. One moment, the cave was quiet, rogues settling in for the night, the fire crackling peacefully, Elara lost in her own turbulent thoughts. The next, screaming. The clash of bodies. Wolves pouring through the entrance in a flood of dark fur and bared teeth. Blackwood's hunters. They must have tracked them here, followed their trail through the ashwood with the relentless patience of predators who knew their prey couldn't run forever. Kale shifted in an instant, his massive white form bursting forth with a snarl that shook the cave walls. He threw himself at the attackers, buying time, his jaws closing around throats with deadly precision. But there were too many. For every hunter he brought down, 2 more took its place. The rogues were fighting. Sorka's scarred face twisted with fury as she tore into the enemy ranks, but they were outnumbered, outmatched, being driven back step by bloody step. A hunter broke through the line, headed straight for Alara. She shifted, her wolf surging forward to meet the threat, but she was too slow. Claws raked across her shoulder, sending her spinning, blood spraying across the stone floor. She hit the ground hard, the pain exploding through her in white-hot waves. Through the chaos, she saw Kale fighting his way toward her. Saw him take a savage bite to his foreleg, blood blooming dark against his white fur. Saw him falter, stumble, keep coming anyway. He reached her just as the hunter lunged for her throat. Intercepted the attack with his own body, the enemy's teeth sinking into his shoulder instead. He killed the hunter with a single crushing bite, then collapsed beside her, his breathing ragged, his injured leg hanging useless. The wound was bad. Deep. She could see bone through the torn flesh, could smell the blood pumping out with every beat of his heart. Kale. She shifted back to human form, pressing her hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Hold on. Just hold on. But the blood kept coming, seeping between her fingers, pooling on the cold stone beneath them. Around them, the battle still raged, Sorka's rogues making a final desperate stand, but Alara barely noticed. All she could see was Kale's gray eyes, glazing over with shock and pain, finding her face and holding on like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. Go, he gasped. Run. I'll hold them off. I'm not leaving you. You have to. If Blackwood gets you. I said no. The heat started in her chest. Built without her permission, spreading outward through her veins like liquid fire. Her hands began to tingle where they pressed against his wound, and she looked down to see light spilling between her fingers, golden, warm, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. No. Not her heartbeat. Their heartbeat. The bond between them, blazing to life with a power she'd never known she possessed. Alara? Kale's voice was distant, confused. What's happening? She didn't answer. Didn't know how to answer. The light was growing brighter, spreading from her hands into his flesh, and she could feel it now, feel his wound like it was her own, feel the torn muscle and shattered bone, feel the damage Blackwood's hunter had done. And then she felt it healing. The muscle knitting back together. The bone fusing, whole and strong. The blood vessels sealing, the skin closing over the wound like it had never existed. When the light finally faded, Alara pulled back her hands to find smooth, unmarked skin where moments ago there had been a wound that should have taken days to close. She stared at her palms. Still glowing faintly. Still warm with power she didn't understand. Around them, the battle had stopped. The surviving hunters were fleeing, Sorka's rogues too shocked by what they'd witnessed to give chase. Even Sorka herself had gone still, her amber eyes wide, her scarred face slack with disbelief. A Luna healer, she breathed. It's true. The bloodline survived. Alara looked up at her, then back down at Kale, who was staring at his healed shoulder like he'd never seen his own arm before. What am I? She whispered. But she already knew the answer. Had always known, somewhere deep inside, that she was more than what her father had tried to make her. She was a Luna healer. And Marcus Blackwood would burn the world to own her. Chapter 4. The morning after the attack, Kale called a council. Alara watched from the edge of the gathering as he addressed Sorka's rogues, his voice carrying through the cave with an authority that seemed to surprise even him. This was the Alpha King she'd heard stories about, not the confused, gentle man who had chopped her wood and bared his throat to her temper, but a leader whose presence commanded attention without demanding it. Marcus Blackwood has declared himself regent, Kale said. He's consolidating power while the council believes I'm dead. If we wait much longer, his position will be unassailable. He'll have the armies, the alliances, the legal authority to crush any challenge. And what do you propose? Sorka asked, her arms crossed over her chest. A handful of rogues and one wounded king against the might of the territories? I propose we expose him. The trafficking networks, the massacre at Silverbrook, the attempted assassination of the Alpha King, all of it documented, all of it undeniable. Cale's jaw tightened. Blackwood has built his power on lies and murder. We tear those lies apart, and his support crumbles. Pretty words. Sorka's scarred mouth twisted. But you'll need more than evidence to take down a wolf with Blackwood's resources. You'll need an army. I know. Cale glanced toward Alara, and something complicated passed across his face. I have allies who will rally to me once they know I'm alive. But reaching them means crossing hostile territory. It means risk. And I won't ask anyone to take that risk who doesn't choose it freely. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Cale spoke again, his voice quieter now. I'm going to reclaim my throne. I'm going to expose Marcus and burn the trafficking networks to the ground. I'll do it alone if I have to. He paused. But I'd rather not do it alone. Alara found him later, standing at the cave's entrance, staring out at the snow-covered forest with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're really going to do this, she said. Challenge Blackwood. Take back your throne. Yes. Even knowing he has the armies, the council, the entire weight of the territories behind him? Cale turned to face her, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. The weariness of a man who had spent years carrying burdens too heavy for any single wolf. I've spent my reign being the monster alphas are expected to be, he said quietly. Cold. Ruthless. Dispensing justice without mercy because mercy was seen as weakness. I told myself it was necessary. That the territories needed a firm hand, that peace required fear. His laugh was bitter. And where did it get me? Betrayed by my closest friend. Used as a puppet for atrocities committed in my name. Lying half dead in a stranger's cabin while the wolf I trusted burned everything I was supposed to protect. Cale. I'm tired, Alara. The words came out raw, stripped of pretense. I'm tired of being what everyone expects. I'm tired of the throne and the power and the endless games of dominance that cost innocent wolves their lives. He met her eyes. But I can't walk away. Not while Blackwood is hunting Omegas. Not while the networks your father helped build are still operating. Not while wolves like Sorka are living in caves because the world we created has no place for them. She didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to reconcile this man, this broken, determined, achingly honest man, with the monster she believed he was. You could die, she finally managed. Challenging Blackwood. Going against the council. All of it. I know. And you're doing it anyway. What else can I do? He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek so gently she barely felt the touch. I won't force the bond between us, Alara. Won't command your loyalty or demand you stand beside me. You've had enough of men deciding your fate without your consent. Whatever you choose, to fight with me, to walk away, to disappear into the ashwood and never look back, I'll accept it. I'll understand. Her heart was pounding. Her wolf was straining toward him, desperate for more contact, more closeness, more of everything he was offering. But this wasn't a decision to make with her wolf. I need time, she said. To think. Cale nodded, dropping his hand. Take all the time you need. She found Sorka in one of the deeper caves, sharpening a blade with methodical strokes that sent sparks dancing in the darkness. You're going with him, Sorka said without looking up. I can see it in your face. I haven't decided anything. Haven't you? The rogue leader set down her blade, fixing Alara with those unsettling amber eyes. You've got that look. The one I've seen on 100 wolves right before they do something either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both. Usually is. Sorka leaned back against the cave wall. So why are you here? Looking for permission? Absolution? A reason to walk away? Alara was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm looking for a reason to fight. And the Alpha King isn't enough? The bond, it's not. She struggled to find the words. I don't want to do this because of what I feel for him. I don't want to be pulled into another war by another Alpha who thinks he knows what's best for me. Sorka laughed, sharp and humorless. Then don't do it for him. Do it for us. She gestured vaguely at the caves around them. For every Omega your father sold. For the girls still caged in Blackwood's compounds, waiting to find out how much their bodies are worth. For the woman you would have become if that monster had gotten his hands on you. The words hit Alara like a punch to the chest. You've got power now, Sorka continued. Real power. The kind that scares wolves like Blackwood, that made them wipe out the Luna healers 2 centuries ago. You can use it to hide. To run. To pretend none of this is your problem. Her amber eyes hardened. Or you can use it to burn down everything they built on our suffering. Alara thought about the ledger. The names. The prices. She thought about her mother, who had died in a cellar, not a birthing bed. She thought about herself, reserved for sale, saved for Blackwood like a prize pig waiting for slaughter. I'll fight, she said. Not for Kale. Not yet. But for you. For them. For the girl I was. Sorka smiled, and for once, there was warmth in it. Good. Now let's figure out how to take down a tyrant. The route to the capital ran through the Eastern Territories. Alara had known this from the moment Kale spread his maps across the cave floor, tracing the paths that would take them from the Ashwood to the heart of the Wolf Kingdoms. She'd seen the territory marked in careful script, had felt her stomach clench with a dread that had nothing to do with the dangers ahead. The Eastern Pack. Ruled by Dominic Ashford. Her fated mate. The man who had thrown her out hours before her pack burned, who had looked at her with disgust in his eyes and called her too weak to stand beside an alpha. There's no way around it, she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Not without adding 2 weeks to our journey. Kale's expression was unreadable. We don't have 2 weeks. Every day we delay is another day Blackwood consolidates his power. We could go through the Northern Passage. Controlled by Blackwood's allies. They'd have us in chains before we made it 10 miles. She knew he was right. Had known it before she asked. But some part of her had hoped for an alternative, a path that didn't require her to face the wolf who had shattered her heart on the worst night of her life. Dominic and I have history, she said finally. Difficult history. I know. Kale's voice was gentle. Sorka told me. Of course she had. Alara made a mental note to have words with the rogue leader about sharing her personal business. He rejected me, she said, forcing the words out past the old shame. The night my pack was attacked. We'd been promised to each other since childhood, the bond between us confirmed by the seers. I went to him when the screaming started, desperate for help. And he. She swallowed. He called me weak. Worthless. Said he'd rather die without an heir than tie his bloodline to an Omega so pathetic she couldn't even save her own family. Kale was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with barely contained fury. He was wrong. Was he? The old doubts rose up, ugly and familiar. I couldn't save them. I ran. I hid. I let everyone I loved die while I crawled into a hole and... You survived. Kale moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the heat of his body. You survived when Blackwood's hunters wanted you dead. You built a life from nothing. You saved me when every instinct told you to let me die in the snow. His gray eyes burned with intensity. The wolf who called you weak is a fool. And if he couldn't see the strength in you, that's his loss. His failure. Not yours. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to let his conviction replace the voice in her head that still echoed with Dominic's cruelty. But some wounds didn't heal just because someone told you they should. We'll need safe passage through his territory, she said, pulling back from the emotional precipice. Dominic won't give it freely. He'll want something in return. Then we'll negotiate. He'll want me. The words hung in the air between them. Cale's jaw tightened, his wolf rising close enough to the surface that his eyes flickered with pale light. Then he'll be disappointed. They reached the eastern border 5 days later. Dominic's wolves met them at the mountain pass, a dozen armed guards in the silver livery of the Ashford pack, blocking the narrow road that led into the valley below. The Alpha King, their captain said, his tone carefully neutral. We'd heard you were dead. Rumors of my death were exaggerated. Cale's voice carried the cold authority of his station. I require passage through Eastern Territory. I've come to speak with Alpha Ashford. The Alpha has been informed of your approach. The captain's eyes slid to Alara, and she saw recognition flash across his features. He's eager to receive you. The way he said it made her skin crawl. The Ashford stronghold was everything she remembered. A fortress of gray stone and iron gates, perched on a cliff overlooking a valley of snow-capped peaks. She had come here once as a girl, brought by her father to meet her promised mate. Had walked these halls with hope in her heart and dreams of a future that had never come. Now she walked them with an Alpha King at her side and the ghosts of her shattered illusions dogging her every step. Dominic was waiting for them in the great hall. He'd grown more handsome in 2 years, if that was possible. Broader through the shoulders, his dark hair longer than she remembered, his features sharpened by the responsibilities of leadership. He sat on his throne like he'd been born to it, radiating confidence and power and the easy arrogance of a wolf who had never known true hardship. His blue eyes found her the moment she entered, and she saw his expression shift. Surprise first, then something that looked almost like hunger. Alara Vane. He rose from his throne, descending the dais with deliberate steps. I thought you were dead. I thought the same of you. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. At least, I hoped. Dominic laughed, apparently delighted by her hostility. Still sharp-tongued. Good. I always admired your fire. You had a strange way of showing it. I had my reasons. He stopped in front of her, close enough to touch, and inhaled deeply. His eyes widened. You smell different. Stronger. His gaze dropped to her hands, her neck, the places where a healer's power tended to manifest. The rumors are true, then. A Luna healer, risen from the ashes of Silverbrook. The rumors are none of your concern. Everything in my territory is my concern. Dominic's attention shifted to Cale, and she saw the challenge in his posture, the subtle bristling of an alpha confronting another in his own domain. Alpha King. You've come seeking passage? An alliance, Cale said, matching Dominic's challenging posture with calm authority. Marcus Blackwood has betrayed the throne. I mean to reclaim what's mine and bring him to justice. Bold claims. Do you have proof? The massacre at Silverbrook. The trafficking networks run by his co-conspirator, Alpha Vane. 3 bullets in my chest from hunters wearing Blackwood's colors. Interesting. Dominic circled them slowly, his eyes never leaving Alara's face. And what would you offer in exchange for my army? My support? My wolves dying for your cause? Justice. A new order in the territories. An end to the corruption that allowed wolves like Vane and Blackwood to flourish. Pretty words. But I prefer more, tangible compensation. Dominic stopped directly in front of Alara, his blue eyes boring into hers. I want the right to court Alara Vane. To renew the bond that should have been completed 2 years ago. The words hit her like a slap. No, she said immediately. Hear me out. Dominic held up a hand, his expression earnest. I know I hurt you. What I said that night, it was unforgivable. But I had my reasons. Reasons, she repeated flatly. I knew about the trafficking. About what your father was. I'd been investigating him for months, gathering evidence, preparing to move against him when Blackwood's attack interrupted everything. Dominic stepped closer, and she could feel the pull of the fated bond between them, weaker than she remembered, but still there, a hook buried in her chest that she couldn't quite remove. I rejected you to protect you. To put distance between us so that when the storm came, you wouldn't be caught in it. I thought if you hated me, you'd stay away. Stay safe. You thought I'd stay safe by being alone? Homeless? Abandoned by the one wolf who was supposed to protect me? I was young. Stupid. I made the wrong choice. Dominic reached for her hand, and she let him take it, too stunned to pull away. But I never stopped wanting you. Never stopped feeling the bond between us. And now that you're here, standing in front of me, more powerful than I ever imagined. His voice dropped to a whisper. Give me a chance to make it right. Let me court you properly. Let me prove I'm worthy of what we could have together. She felt the fated bond surge in response to his words, that ancient connection pulling her toward him, whispering that this was right, this was meant to be, this was the destiny that had been written for her before she was born. But beside it, burning brighter, was the bond she shared with Cale. Not a fated bond. Not something written in the stars or ordained by the seers. Something she had chosen, something that had grown from shared suffering and reluctant trust and the terrible intimacy of saving each other's lives. She looked at Dominic, really looked at him, and felt the hollow echo of the bond they'd been promised. Then she looked at Cale, standing tense and silent behind her, his wolf barely restrained, his jealousy a volcanic presence she could feel through the connection between them. And she made her choice. No. Elara pulled her hand from Dominic's grip, stepping back until she stood alone between the two alphas. The word rang through the great hall, silencing the whispers of the watching wolves. No. Dominic's handsome face twisted with confusion. Elara, I'm offering you everything. Alliance with the king, protection for your people, the chance to complete a bond a bond one didn't choose. Her voice was steady now, growing stronger with every word. A bond that was arranged when I was a child, by men who saw me as property to be traded. A bond that you broke 2 years ago, when you looked at me and saw nothing worth saving. I explained that. I was trying to protect. You were trying to protect yourself. The truth crystallized as she spoke it, 2 years of doubt and shame falling away like chains. You knew what my father was. Knew what he'd done, what he would do. And instead of warning me, instead of helping me, you pushed me away because you didn't want to risk your precious position. Your precious alliance. That's not. I spent 2 years believing I was worthless. She stepped forward, and Dominic actually stepped back, something like fear flickering in his blue eyes. Believing that I was too weak to be loved, too pathetic to deserve protection. You put that poison in my head, Dominic. You broke something in me that night. Elara, please. But I'm not broken anymore. The power was rising in her, that golden warmth she'd felt when she'd healed Cale's wound. It spread through her veins, glowing beneath her skin, making the air around her shimmer with barely contained energy. I am not your property. I am not your prize. And I am not going to spend another moment of my life bound to a wolf who sees me as a stepping stone to power. She reached inside herself, to the place where the fated bond still lingered. That hook in her chest, that unwanted tether to a wolf she had never truly chosen. And she pulled. The pain was blinding. She heard herself scream, heard Dominic echo it, felt the bond between them stretching, tearing, finally snapping with a sound like shattering glass. When she could see again, she was on her knees. The golden light was fading from her skin. And the place where the fated bond had lived for her entire adult life was empty. Hollow. Free. What did you do? Dominic's voice was a hoarse whisper. He was clutching his chest, his face pale with shock. What did you, the bond? It's gone. How is that possible? She looked up at him, and for the first time, she felt nothing. No pull. No hook. No destiny binding her to a wolf she hadn't chosen. I broke it, she said simply. I chose myself. The silence in the great hall was absolute. Then Cale was there, helping her to her feet, his hands gentle on her arms, his eyes searching her face with desperate concern. Are you hurt? Elara, talk to me. Are you? I'm fine. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. Better than fine. I'm free. You can't do that, Dominic said, his voice rising with hysteria. Fated bonds can't be broken. It's impossible. The seers have always said. The seers were wrong. Sorka's voice cut through the chaos. The rogue leader had pushed her way through the watching crowd, her scarred face alight with something that might have been wonder. Luna healers don't just mend bodies. They can break bonds. Rewrite them. Forge new ones. She looked at Elara with new respect. You just did something that hasn't been done in 200 years. Elara's legs were shaking. Her head was pounding. But beneath the exhaustion, something bright and fierce was burning. She had chosen. For the first time in her life, she had chosen her own fate. And it felt like flying. They left at dawn. Dominic, still reeling from the severed bond, had granted them passage through his territory, though whether from shock, fear, or some lingering sense of obligation, Elara couldn't say. She found she didn't care. He was part of her past now. A wound that had finally healed. The ambush came at the eastern border. Later, she would try to piece together how it happened. How Blackwood's forces had found them. Who had betrayed their route. But in the moment, there was only chaos, wolves pouring from the tree line, silver arrows flying through the air, the screams of the dying mixing with the howling of the attackers. She shifted without thinking, her wolf surging forward to meet the threat. Beside her, Cale's white form was a blur of deadly motion, cutting through enemies with the lethal efficiency of a wolf who had fought 100 battles. But there were too many. Always too many. She saw Dominic fall. He had followed them to the border, some mad impulse driving him to try to win her back, his body crumpling under the weight of 3 hunters. She felt nothing. She saw Cale go down, overwhelmed by a wave of dark wolves, his snarl of defiance cut short by a blow that sent him sprawling. She felt everything. Then hands were on her, human hands, silver chains burning against her skin as they wrapped around her throat. She shifted back to human form involuntarily, gasping, the chain cutting off her air and her connection to her wolf in one brutal motion. Got you, a voice hissed in her ear. The general's going to be so pleased. They dragged her through the carnage, past the bodies of rogues and eastern wolves, past Cale's unconscious form being loaded onto a wagon like cargo. Through a sea of dark-clad hunters who parted before them with something like reverence. And finally, to the wolf who stood at the center of it all. He was older than she'd expected. Handsome, in a cold and brutal way. His uniform was immaculate despite the blood splattered across the battlefield, and he wore the black crown sigil of the Alpha King like he'd been born to it. Marcus Blackwood smiled as they forced her to her knees before him. It was her father's smile. The same cold calculation, the same hungry satisfaction at seeing prey brought low. Well, well, he said, reaching out to grip her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. The little vain girl. I've been waiting for you. She tried to spit in his face, but the chain around her throat tightened, cutting off her air. Your father promised you to me, you know. The night of the massacre, that was my payment for cleaning up his loose ends. But things got complicated, and you slipped away. His grip tightened, his smile widening. I've spent 2 years looking for you. Go to hell, she managed to choke out. Eventually, perhaps. He leaned closer, his breath hot against her face, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. But first, I'm going to tell you a secret, little healer. Something your father never knew. Something that's going to make everything that comes next so much sweeter. His lips brushed her ear, and his words turned her blood to ice. Your mother was my first. My very first Luna healer. I kept her for 3 years before she finally broke. Before she finally gave me what I wanted, a daughter to carry on the bloodline. A daughter I could raise from birth, train from childhood, mold into the perfect weapon. The world tilted. Spun. Threatened to collapse entirely. But your father interfered. Stole her away before I could claim you. Hid you in that worthless pack, made you believe you were his. Blackwood pulled back, his smile terrible in the fading light. You've never been a vain, Alara. You've always been mine. His hand stroked her cheek, almost gentle. Your mother was my first, he repeated. You'll be my last. Chapter 5. The dungeons beneath Blackwood's fortress were carved from ancient stone, cold and damp and reeking of despair. Alara had been thrown into a cell barely large enough to stand in, the silver chains around her throat and wrists burning her skin with every breath. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the horror echoing through her mind. Your mother was my first. She couldn't stop hearing his words. Couldn't stop seeing the terrible satisfaction in his eyes as he'd revealed the truth she'd spent her entire life not knowing. Her mother hadn't died in childbirth. Her mother had been a prisoner. A weapon. A Luna healer drained of everything she had until there was nothing left. And Alara herself, the daughter she believed was born of a cruel Alpha's loveless marriage, was the product of something far worse. She was Blackwood's creation. His legacy. The continuation of a bloodline he'd been cultivating for decades. She was never a vain. She had always been his. They came for her at dawn. Guards in Blackwood's colors dragged her from the cell, the silver chains cutting deeper with every step. She stumbled through torchlit corridors, past cells holding wolves she didn't recognize. Prisoners, she realized, wolves who had opposed Blackwood's regime and paid the price. Then she saw Kale. He was chained to the wall of a larger chamber, silver links wrapped around his arms, his chest, his throat. His white hair was matted with blood, his face bruised and swollen from the beating they'd given him during transport. But his gray eyes were alert, tracking her movement as the guards dragged her into the room. Alara. Her name on his lips was a prayer and a curse. Don't. Whatever he wants from you, don't give it to him. Touching. Marcus Blackwood stepped from the shadows, his uniform pristine, his smile sharp as a blade. But ultimately futile. She'll give me exactly what I want. They always do. He circled Alara slowly, his eyes assessing her like she was a prize mare at auction. Your mother lasted 3 years, he said conversationally. Impressive, really. Most Luna healers break within months. The power they carry, it's not meant to be taken. The extraction process is unpleasant. But your mother was strong. She fought me every step of the way. Alara's hands curled into fists despite the chains. Where is she? What did you do with her? She's dead, little healer. Has been for 19 years. She gave me everything she had, her power, her gift, her blood, and when there was nothing left to take, she simply stopped. His smile widened. But not before she gave me you. The perfect continuation of the bloodline. The daughter I'd always wanted. I'm not your daughter. Aren't you? He reached out, touching her face with fingers that made her skin crawl. You have her eyes. Her gift. Her stubborn resistance to the inevitable. His hand dropped to her throat, pressing against the pulse that raced beneath her skin. But you also have my strength. My ambition. You're the best of both of us, Alara. Together, we're going to reshape the world. The ritual chamber was vast and ancient, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Torches lined the walls, casting dancing shadows across a stone altar at the room's center. Around the perimeter, chained to iron posts, stood a circle of wolves, alphas, Alara realized with dawning horror. Dozens of them, their eyes vacant, their movements sluggish and mechanical. Puppets. All of them. Beautiful, isn't it? Marcus gestured at his collection with obvious pride. The alpha of the Northern Mountain Pack. The leader of the coastal territories. The three brothers who control the southern trade routes. He paused beside one wolf whose blank eyes sent chills down Alara's spine. Even the old Alpha King's most trusted general, before Kale, of course. I've been building this army for 20 years. How? The word came out strangled, torn from her throat by the sheer impossibility of what she was seeing. Your mother's gift. Marcus's smile turned predatory. Luna healers can forge bonds, break them, rewrite them. But with the right ritual, with enough power, they can also create bonds where none existed before. Bonds of absolute control, absolute obedience, absolute loyalty. He turned to face her fully. Your mother gave me the power to enslave them all. And now you're going to give me the power to enslave everyone else. He signaled to his guards, and they dragged her toward the altar. The process is simple, Marcus continued, his voice almost gentle now. I draw on your power. Channel it through the binding ritual. Use it to forge new connections with every alpha in the realm. He helped her onto the altar himself, his hands clinical as he positioned her arms, her legs, her head. When it's done, I'll control them all. Every pack. Every territory. Every wolf who ever dared to challenge my authority. And me? She forced the words out past the fear closing her throat. What happens to me? The same thing that happened to your mother. He stroked her hair, almost tenderly. You'll give me everything you have. And when there's nothing left. He shrugged. I'll start again. Perhaps with your children, if you survive long enough to bear them. Across the chamber, Kale roared against his chains. The sound was raw, animal, filled with a fury that made the torches flicker. But the silver held him fast, and the guards posted around him didn't so much as flinch. Don't worry, Marcus told him, almost kindly. You'll be first. The Alpha King, bound to my will. Think how powerful that will make me. Think how completely the realm will fall into line when they see their rightful ruler kneeling at my feet. He turned back to Alara, his eyes glowing with anticipation. Let's begin. The ritual started with pain. Marcus placed his hands on her temples, and it felt like fire pouring through her skull. She screamed, couldn't help it. As his power forced its way into her mind, her gift, the place where her Luna healer abilities lived. Give it to me, his voice echoed in her thoughts. Give me everything. She felt him pulling at her power, drawing it out of her like venom from a wound. Felt it flowing from her body into his, felt herself growing weaker with every passing second. Through the haze of agony, she saw the bound alphas around the chamber begin to glow. Saw Marcus's army of puppets strengthening as he fed them with her stolen gift. Saw the future he was building, an empire of slaves, a world where every wolf answered to his will. And she saw Kale. Still fighting. Still straining against his chains despite the silver burning his skin. Still staring at her with gray eyes full of desperation and rage and something that looked impossibly like love. Fight, his voice whispered through the bond between them. Please, Alara. Fight. 2 years. That was how long she'd survived alone. How long she'd hidden in the ruins of her old life, learning to hunt, to trap, to endure winters that would have killed wolves twice her strength. 2 years of grief and rage and the slow, grinding work of refusing to die. Marcus thought he understood her. Thought he knew what she was capable of, what she would surrender when the pain became too great. He was wrong. She stopped fighting the flow of power. Stopped trying to hold on to her gift as he pulled it from her body. Instead, she opened herself completely, let him take everything he wanted, gave him access to the deepest parts of her Luna healer abilities. And then she inverted the flow. Marcus screamed. The sound echoed through the ritual chamber, high and terrible, as Alara turned his own power against him. Every ounce of energy he tried to take from her, she reflected back. Burning through the bonds he'd forged, searing the connections he'd built over 2 decades of patient manipulation. She felt them breaking. One by one, the chains that bound the puppet alphas snapped like overstressed cables. The wolves around the chamber gasped, staggered, their vacant eyes suddenly flooding with awareness and horror and rage. "What are you doing?" Marcus's grip on her temples tightened, but his control was slipping. "Stop. Stop. You'll destroy everything." "Good." She pushed harder. Poured everything she had into the reversal, using his own stolen power as fuel for the destruction. The bonds continued to shatter, northern wolves, southern wolves, wolves from territories she'd never heard of, all of them suddenly free of the chains that had held them. And they were angry. The first alpha attacked Marcus from behind, teeth sinking into his shoulder. The second caught his arm, wrenching it away from Alara's face. Within seconds, the ritual chamber had become a battlefield, freed wolves turning on their captor with decades of suppressed fury. But Marcus was still strong. Still drawing on the power he'd stolen over the years. He threw off his attackers, shifted into a massive dark wolf, and tore through anyone who got in his way. Alara rolled off the altar, her legs barely supporting her weight. The effort of inverting the ritual had cost her. She could feel her power fading, her gift burning itself out with every bond she destroyed. Too much, she thought dimly. I'm using too much. But she couldn't stop. If she stopped now, if she let even one of Marcus's bonds survive, he would rebuild. He would come for her again, come for everyone she'd learned to love, and the nightmare would begin all over again. So she kept pushing. Kept burning. Kept destroying the empire of slavery that Marcus had built on the bones of her mother's suffering. And felt herself dying by inches. Cale watched her fading. He could feel it through the bond, the connection that had grown between them over weeks of shared survival, the link that had crystallized the night she'd chosen him over Dominic. Her life force was guttering like a candle in a hurricane, burning away to nothing as she poured everything she had into destroying Marcus's web of control. She was killing herself. And she knew it. And she was doing it anyway. He pulled at his chains with renewed desperation. The silver burned his skin, ate into his flesh, sent agony shooting through every nerve. But the pain didn't matter. Nothing mattered except getting to her, helping her, stopping her from sacrificing herself for a world that had never done anything but hurt her. Please, he thought, directing the plea at anyone who might be listening. Please, I can't lose her. Not now. Not like this. And something answered. The bond between them flared. Alara felt it, a surge of warmth through the connection she'd forged without realizing it, a flow of power that wasn't her own. Cale's strength, his wolf, his desperate love for her, all of it pouring through the mate bond and into her failing body. Together, his voice echoed in her mind. We do this together. She looked up, and through the chaos of the battle, she saw him. The chains that had held him were shattered, broken links scattered across the stone floor. His eyes blazed with pale light, his body wreathed in the golden glow of her power flowing through him. He'd broken free. Not through physical strength, the silver should have made that impossible. But through the bond. Through the connection between them, the love that had grown from reluctant trust into something unbreakable. Marcus saw him too. The dark wolf turned, abandoning his other opponents, focusing all his attention on the Alpha King who stood between him and his prize. Kill him, Marcus snarled. Kill them both. But his guards were dead or dying. His puppet alphas had turned against him. And Cale was already moving, his white wolf bursting forth in an explosion of pale fur and savage grace. They met in the center of the ritual chamber. Alara crawled toward them. She was so weak now, her power nearly burned away, her wolf silent and unreachable. But she could still feel the bond. Could still channel what remained of her gift through the connection she shared with Cale. Marcus was strong, stronger than any wolf should be, fueled by decades of stolen power. He fought with the savagery of desperation, knowing that defeat meant death, that all his carefully laid plans were crumbling around him. But Kale was fighting for something more than survival. He was fighting for her. For them. For the future they might have together if they could just survive the next few minutes. And he wasn't fighting alone. Elara reached out through the bond, feeding him everything she had left. Her power. Her strength. Her love. She felt it flow from her into him, felt his wolf grow larger, stronger, more deadly with every passing second. Marcus saw what was happening. Tried to break away, to flee, to find some escape from the trap closing around him. He never made it. Kale's jaws closed around his throat. The bite was clean. Final. Marcus Blackwood. Tyrant, trafficker, the wolf who had built an empire on the suffering of Luna healers, died with Elara's mother's face before his eyes. Silence. The battle was over. Marcus's forces were dead or scattered. The freed alphas stood in shocked clusters, trying to process 20 years of slavery ending in a single bloody night. And Elara lay on the cold stone floor, feeling the last sparks of her power fade into nothing. Her wolf was gone. She reached for it and found only emptiness. The place where her animal half had lived was hollow, burned away by the effort of destroying Marcus's web. Her gift was gone too. The golden warmth that had lived in her chest since the night she'd healed Kale's wound had vanished completely, leaving behind something cold and quiet and terribly human. Elara. Kale was there, shifted back to human form, gathering her in his arms with desperate tenderness. Elara, talk to me. Please. I'm okay. The words came out weak, barely a whisper. I'm alive. Your wolf. Gone. She managed a smile that felt more like a grimace. My gift too. All of it. Burned away. A laugh bubbled up, bitter and exhausted. Guess I'm just human now. His arms tightened around her. I don't care. I don't care if you're human or wolf or something in between. You're alive. You're here. That's all that matters. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that his love didn't depend on her power, her gift, her value as a weapon or a prize. But she was so tired. Too tired to hope. Too tired to do anything but close her eyes and let the darkness take her. She slept for 3 days. When she woke, she was in a bed softer than any she'd ever known, in a room flooded with sunlight, with Kale asleep in a chair beside her, dark circles under his eyes, his hand wrapped around hers like he was afraid she'd vanish if he let go. Hey, she croaked. His eyes flew open. Elara. Her name was a prayer on his lips. You're awake. Thank the gods, you're awake. Where are we? The capital. My palace. He reached up to touch her face, his fingers trembling. Marcus's forces surrendered when word spread of his death. The puppet alphas have been testifying about what he did, what he made them do. The council is calling for a complete restructuring of, he stopped himself, shaking his head. None of that matters right now. How do you feel? She took stock. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her throat was raw, her muscles weak, her head pounding with a dull, persistent throb. And inside, where her wolf and her gift had lived, there was only silence. Empty, she said honestly. Human. That's not a bad thing. Isn't it? She struggled to sit up, and he helped her, arranging pillows behind her back with careful attention. You're the Alpha King. You need a mate who can stand beside you. Who can protect you, fight for you, be what a queen is supposed to be. Not a... She gestured at herself, at her powerless body, at everything she'd lost. Not this. I need you. His voice was fierce, brooking no argument. I don't care about power or politics or what anyone thinks a queen should be. I spent my entire reign surrounded by wolves who wanted my throne, my favor, my destruction. You're the first person in 20 years who wanted me. Just me. The broken wolf who showed up on your doorstep with no memory and no power and nothing to offer but trouble. You were very heavy to drag inside. I was. He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, softer, like the man he might have been if life had been kinder. Let me do the heavy lifting now. Let me be the strong one for a while. You've earned the right to rest. She wanted to argue. Wanted to insist that she wasn't helpless, that she could still contribute, that her worth wasn't tied to her ability to shift or heal or break bonds. But she was so tired. And his arms were so warm. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, someone was asking her to let go instead of demanding she hold on. Okay, she whispered. Okay. 1 year later. The realm had changed. Kale's return to the throne had sparked a revolution, not of violence, but of reform. The trafficking networks were dismantled. The laws that had allowed alphas to treat omegas as property were rewritten. The wolves who had suffered under Marcus's regime were offered sanctuary, compensation, a chance to rebuild their shattered lives. Sorka led the effort, her rogue band transformed into a legitimate force for change. She'd become Kale's chief advisor on matters of Omega rights, her scarred face and fierce determination making her impossible to ignore. And Elara. Elara had learned to live without her wolf. It wasn't easy. There were days when the silence inside her felt like a wound that would never heal, when she reached for her animal half and found only emptiness. Days when she felt like a ghost haunting a life that had moved on without her. But there were good days too. Days when she woke in Kale's arms and felt grateful for the simple miracle of being alive. Days when she walked through the palace gardens and marveled at how far she'd come from the burned ruins where she'd hidden for 2 years. Days when she realized that her worth had never been tied to her power. That the woman who had survived, who had fought, who had chosen her own fate, that woman was still here. Still breathing. Still learning how to be something other than a weapon. She was standing in those gardens when she felt the first flutter. Kale. He was at her side in an instant, his face creased with concern. What is it? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She took his hand, pressed it to her belly, to the slight swell that had appeared over the past few months. Just wait. They stood in silence, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, the sound of birdsong drifting from the trees. Then, there. A flutter. A spark. Something moving beneath Kale's palm, something alive and growing and impossibly, wonderfully present. Is that, his voice broke. Elara, is that our daughter? She smiled, tears streaming down her face. At least, I think it's a daughter. I just know. His hands framed her face, his gray eyes shining with tears of his own. A daughter. A daughter. She covered his hands with hers. And Kale, there's something else. What? She reached inside herself, to the place where her gift had lived before it burned away. The place that had been silent and empty for a year. And felt something stir. A spark. Tiny, fragile, barely there, but unmistakably present. The golden warmth of Luna healer power, not her own, but growing inside her nonetheless. She has the gift, Elara whispered. Our daughter. She's a Luna healer. The power hadn't been passed through blood. It had been passed through love, through the bond she and Kale had forged, through the life they'd created together, through the miracle of two broken wolves finding healing in each other. Kale pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. We'll protect her, he said fiercely. We'll teach her. We'll make sure she never knows fear or cages or men who see her as property. We will. Elara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She'll know love. Family. Choice. Everything we had to fight for, she'll have it from the very beginning. She closed her eyes, one hand pressed to her swelling belly, feeling the spark of her daughter's gift pulse in rhythm with her own heartbeat. She'd been rejected, sold, broken, and reborn. She'd lost her wolf, her power, everything she'd thought defined her worth. But standing here, in the arms of the mate she'd chosen, carrying the child they'd made together, she finally understood. Her worth had never been in her power. It had been in her choices. In her courage. In her refusal to let the darkness win. Now she would raise a daughter who would never know the cage, only the sky. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also, to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.